All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're looking at this article, Five Signs She Wants You Sexually.
Okay.
It's from a website called The Modern Man. Some of you sent this in.
Yeah.
And honestly, even the title is making me raise my eyebrows a little bit. But
Yeah.
hey, we're here to unpack it, right?
Absolutely. Let's jump in.
Okay, so the article starts off by saying that women often won't make the first move,
Right.
even if they are attracted to someone. They give some reasons like societal expectations and fear of rejection and wanting to gauge a man's confidence. What do you think about those points?
I mean, those are definitely all factors that can come into play. Um, I mean, societal norms have historically put a lot of pressure on men to initiate in romantic situations,
Hmm.
and that can, make women hesitant to be
Yeah.
the first to show interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the fear of rejection is something that everybody experiences regardless of gender.
Right, makes sense. It's not just about like game playing, but like
Yeah.
genuine concerns and social dynamics.
Right. Absolutely. And wanting to assess a potential partner's confidence, that's also perfectly natural. It's not necessarily about
Yeah.
needing someone who's like loud or domineering,
Yeah.
but just gauging a certain level of like self-assuredness can be attractive.
Right. So it's not totally off base, the article, but then it jumps into these signs,
Okay.
starting with girly fidgeting.
Uh-huh.
They claim that things like playing with hair, necklaces, touching the mouth, these are unconscious giveaways of attraction. Is there any science behind that?
Well, I think, it's important to remember that while body language can communicate a lot, interpreting it accurately is really tricky.
Yeah.
There is some research that suggests that people, and perhaps women in particular, might engage in more of these self-touching behaviors when they're attracted to someone, but these are very subtle cues. And they can be influenced by so many things besides attraction, nervousness,
Yeah.
habit, even just being hot.
Totally. I play with my hair all the time when I'm stressed.
Right.
And the article even suggests that touching the mouth means she's thinking about kissing. That seems like a big leap, doesn't it?
It definitely is. I think it's crucial to avoid oversimplifying and jumping to conclusions based on any, isolated gestures. Body language should always be considered in context, along with other verbal and nonverbal cues. And we also can't forget about cultural differences.
Right. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, what might be considered flirty in one culture
Yeah.
could be completely innocent in another.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
The next sign is all about personal space.
Okay.
The author tells this story where a woman kept getting closer to him, even though he kept stepping back, and claims this was a clear sign that she was into him. But to me, that just sounds kind of invasive, honestly.
It absolutely can be. Everyone has their own personal space boundaries, and respecting those is, fundamental. If someone repeatedly invades your space after you've moved away,
Yeah.
that's a red flag no matter what their intention is.
Yeah.
So it's important to assert your own boundaries and to
Yeah.
communicate any discomfort clearly. And of course, if the woman is already in a relationship,
Oh, right.
any attempt to get closer physically is completely inappropriate and disrespectful.
Absolutely. Consent and respect always come first.
Always.
So moving on, the article talks about touching as a sign of attraction. They say to look for touches that linger or that seem enjoyed, as opposed to just brief, friendly touches.
Okay.
How reliable is that as an indicator?
Well, touch is a very complex form of communication, and how we interpret it really depends on, our personality, our cultural background, and the specific situation. While lingering touches can sometimes suggest romantic interest, they could also just be signs of warmth, friendliness, or a different cultural norm.
Yeah.
So again, it's really important to look at the overall interaction and other cues, rather than relying solely on touch as a sign of attraction.
Gotcha. So context is key.
Yeah.
What about excessive compliments? The article suggests that women might over-compliment a man to boost his confidence and get him to make a move. Doesn't that seem a bit manipulative?
Well, while it's true that compliments can sometimes be used to express interest, I think assuming that every compliment has some ulterior motive
Yeah.
is a cynical approach,
Yeah.
and that can lead to a lot of misinterpretations.
Yeah.
People compliment each other for all sorts of reasons, to be kind,
Right.
to acknowledge effort, to show support. It's important to take compliments at face value, unless there's a really clear pattern of manipulation.
Okay, so maybe not every compliment is a secret seduction tactic. Then the last sign they highlight is the use of sexual innuendos. They even give examples like, I'm good with my hands,
Oh, wow.
and suggest responding in a way that, acknowledges the innuendo.
This is where things get particularly tricky, because humor and flirting can be very subjective.
Yeah.
What one person finds playful, another might find offensive. So it's really crucial to be mindful of the context and another person's reactions. If you're not sure whether someone's flirting or just being friendly, it's always best to err on the side of caution and avoid making assumptions.
Good advice. Misinterpreting humor can lead to some pretty awkward encounters, that's for sure.
Oh,
But what about when the innuendo is like really blatant? Should you just ignore it?
not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is making you uncomfortable with overly sexual comments,
Mm-hmm.
you have every right to set boundaries. You can politely but firmly let them know that you're not interested in that kind of conversation.
That makes sense. So we've covered the 5 signs the article lays out, but there's one more point we haven't touched on.
Okay.
This whole idea that attractive women might seem disinterested at first
Yeah.
to test a man's confidence and weed out like unworthy partners. Thoughts on that?
Well, that's a pretty sweeping generalization.
Yeah.
That plays into some harmful stereotypes, I think.
Okay.
Assuming that all attractive women engage in these kinds of mind games
Yeah.
is not only inaccurate,
Mm-hmm.
but also disrespects their individuality and agency.
Mm-hmm.
People, regardless of attractiveness, have different dating styles and approaches. Some might be more cautious and observant before showing interest, while others might be more open and direct from the start. It really varies from person to person.
So basically, don't buy into those simplistic narratives about how attractive women behave.
Exactly.
It's all about treating everyone as an individual.
Absolutely. And remember, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, open communication,
Mm-hmm.
and genuine connection,
Mm-hmm.
not on deciphering some, supposed secret signals
Right.
or playing mind games.
So far, this article is offering some pretty questionable advice, but there's still more to unpack. So are you ready to dive back in?
Let's do it. I'm curious to see what other insights or perhaps misconceptions this article has in store. This article really seems to push this idea that women, especially attractive women, are constantly playing hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
It claims they'll, intentionally withhold showing interest for the first few minutes of any interaction to, test a guy's confidence and see if he's worthy of their attention.
Yeah, it almost paints this picture of women just sitting there with a stopwatch, judging every interaction like it's some kind of test.
Right.
It feels pretty cynical, doesn't it?
It really does. And it reduces both women and the whole dating process
Mm-hmm.
to something far too simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
People are complex,
Yeah.
and their motivations are rarely that straightforward.
Right.
To suggest that attractive women are intentionally playing games to manipulate men is not only insulting, but it also perpetuates these harmful stereotypes we were talking about earlier.
It's like the article is trying to create this adversarial dynamic between men and women where one is always trying to outsmart or manipulate the other.
Exactly. And that's a recipe for unhealthy relationships, not fulfilling ones. True connection and intimacy come from authenticity, vulnerability, and mutual respect, not from playing mind games or trying to fit into some, preconceived notion of what's attractive.
The article also seems to conflate confidence with persistence. It keeps saying that men need to, make a move, even if a woman isn't giving obvious signals. Doesn't that cross a line?
Absolutely. Confidence is about knowing your own worth and being comfortable in your own skin. It's not about relentlessly pursuing someone who isn't reciprocating your interest. That kind of behavior can come across as pushy and disrespectful, which are definitely not attractive qualities.
It's almost like the article is encouraging men to ignore a woman's boundaries and just keep pushing for physical intimacy, even if she isn't clearly consenting.
Right.
That's really concerning.
It is. Consent is absolutely crucial in any interaction,
Yeah.
especially romantic or sexual ones. It's about clear, enthusiastic agreement from both parties. If someone isn't explicitly saying yes, then it's a no.
Mm-hmm.
And no amount of perceived signs or tests should override that.
It's disheartening that the article frames this kind of pushy behavior as the key to success with women. It feels like it's setting men up for failure and potentially putting women in uncomfortable or even dangerous situations.
I agree. It's perpetuating this harmful idea that men are entitled to women's attention and bodies, regardless of whether they've consented. And this isn't just harmful to women, but also to men who are being taught to disregard boundaries and to equate masculinity with aggression.
So if we can't rely on these so-called signs, how can someone genuinely gauge another person's interest? It feels like we've just thrown out the rule book without offering a replacement.
Well, I think the best and most respectful approach is always open and honest communication. Instead of trying to decode body language or play guessing games,
Right.
why not simply ask
Yeah.
if you're interested in someone? Express that interest directly and respectfully.
That definitely sounds more straightforward and less stressful than trying to interpret every fidget and compliment as some hidden message.
Exactly. And if the other person isn't interested, accept that gracefully and move on. Rejection is a part of life.
Right.
It doesn't reflect on your worth as a person.
So instead of focusing on these 5 signs that she wants you sexually, maybe we should be talking about like the 5 signs of healthy communication and respect.
I couldn't agree more. The foundation of any healthy relationship, romantic or otherwise, is built on mutual respect, clear communication, and a genuine desire to connect with another human being,
Yeah.
not to manipulate or control them.
Well said. I think we've thoroughly debunked the article's claims here, but there's one more point it makes that we haven't addressed yet.
Okay.
It suggests that men should respond to a woman's sexual innuendos in a way that acknowledges and even escalates the sexual tension.
Right.
What's your take on that?
This is where things can get particularly tricky, because humor and flirting are so subjective. What one person finds playful,
Yeah.
another might find offensive or inappropriate. So it's important to be mindful of the context, the relationship dynamic, and the other person's reactions. If you're unsure whether someone is genuinely flirting
Right.
or just being friendly, it's always best to err on the side of caution and avoid making assumptions.
So how should someone respond if they're unsure of the other person's intentions? Just play it cool.
I think the best approach is to acknowledge the comment in a neutral way, without necessarily reciprocating the innuendo.
Okay.
For example, if someone says something suggestive, you can simply laugh and say, "That's funny," or "You're a riot." This shows that you've heard them, but it doesn't necessarily imply that you're interested in pursuing anything further.
That makes sense. It avoids making assumptions or putting the other person on the spot.
Exactly. And if they continue to make suggestive comments after you've signaled your discomfort, it's perfectly acceptable to set firmer boundaries. You can politely but firmly let them know that you're not interested in that kind of conversation.
So basically, clear communication and respect are key, even when navigating potentially flirtatious situations.
Absolutely. Remember, the goal is to create a comfortable and safe environment for everyone involved. And that starts with being mindful of your words and actions and respecting the other person's boundaries.
Okay, so we've pretty much dissected this whole 5 signs she wants you sexually article. And honestly, I'm a little bit relieved. It seems like the real secret to success in dating isn't about deciphering secret codes or playing mind games, but about being authentic, respectful, and communicating openly.
I couldn't agree more. Healthy relationships are built on trust, mutual respect, and clear communication, not manipulation or gamesmanship.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Yes, actually.
Ah.
I think it's important to remember that attraction and desire are complex and multifaceted. They're influenced by a wide range of factors, from physical appearance to shared interests, values, and emotional connection. Reducing attraction to a set of 5 signs is not only simplistic,
Yeah.
but also ignores the richness and depth of human connection.
That's a great point. So instead of obsessing over these supposed signs, maybe we should focus on building genuine connections with others based on mutual respect and shared values.
Exactly. And remember, true intimacy and connection come from a place of authenticity, vulnerability, and shared experiences, not from trying to manipulate or decode someone's behavior.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. But before we go, we wanted to flip the script a bit and get your input.
Okay.
Since this article focused on those 5 supposed signs she wants you sexually, we thought it'd be helpful to talk about some signs that someone is genuinely interested in you. In a healthy and respectful way, what are some things you look for?
That's a great idea. I think one of the first things I notice is engaged body language. I don't just mean physical proximity,
Right.
but things like facing you directly, making eye contact, leaning in when you speak. Those are all good indicators that someone is present and interested in what you're saying.
Right. So active listening.
Yeah.
And showing they're engaged in the conversation. What else?
Asking questions about you,
Okay.
your life, your thoughts, your experiences, not just waiting for their turn to talk, but genuinely wanting to learn more about you as a person.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, they'll offer details about themselves as well, showing a willingness to be open and vulnerable in return.
So reciprocity is key.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Anything else?
Definitely. Look for someone who initiates contact. And I don't just mean responding to your texts or calls,
Right.
but actively reaching out first, suggesting activities you could do together, things like that.
Okay.
These actions show that they're putting in effort and genuinely want to spend time with you.
So proactive and enthusiastic about building a connection. This is already feeling a lot more hopeful than the article's advice. Any last insight before we wrap things up for real this time?
Just remember that even these are just indicators, not guarantees. The best way to know if someone is truly interested in you is through direct, respectful communication. Express your own interest and see how they respond. That's far more effective than trying to decode signs and play guessing games.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. To wrap things up, we'd love to hear from you. What are some verbal cues that you've noticed signal someone is interested? Head over to our social media and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your perspectives. We've spent this whole deep dive really picking apart this article and all of its advice. And honestly, I'm feeling a little more optimistic after shifting the focus to genuine connection and open communication.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in trying to, like, decode secret signs or
Yeah.
follow these oversimplified rules. But ultimately, healthy relationships are built on a much stronger foundation.
You know, it's kind of ironic. The article claims to offer a shortcut to figuring out if someone's attracted to you, but it really ends up just making things more complicated and confusing.
It's so true. It's almost as if they've created this elaborate game with all these rules and
Yeah.
these hidden meanings,
Yeah.
when in reality, it's so much simpler and straightforward.
Exactly. It's like they've taken this beautiful and complex thing like human connection
Ah.
and tried to reduce it to a formula. Right?
And we all know that real life just doesn't work that way.
Right. And it's not just about romance either. This kind of thinking can seep into all sorts of relationships, making us second guess people's intentions and motivations instead of just appreciating them for who they are.
I think that's a really important point. We've been focusing on romantic attraction here, but these principles of open communication, respect, and genuine connection apply to all kinds of relationships: friendships, family relationships, professional relationships, you name it.
Absolutely. Those are the foundations of healthy and fulfilling relationships across the board. When we approach interactions with those values in mind, we create a space for authenticity and genuine connection to flourish.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. Hopefully this deep dive has provided a helpful counterpoint to some of the questionable advice out there and encouraged everyone to prioritize open communication and mutual respect in all the relationships.
I completely agree. It's been a pleasure unpacking all of this with you. Likewise. And to our listeners, we'd love to keep the conversation going. Head over to our social media and share your thoughts on the topic. What are some of the things you look for when trying to gauge someone's genuine interest? We're all ears.